listener production.
Hello, Sasha Barbagat with you. Welcome to The Briefing. When a Dalai Lama dies, who gets to replace him? The spiritual leader of Tibet, the 14th Dalai Lama, just celebrated his 89th birthday over the weekend. But despite his own predictions of living till 111, it has caused a stir as to whether we will soon hear more about his succession plan.
When one Dalai Lama dies, there is a very rigorous search procedure that is run according to traditional methods. These involve things like divination and visions. There's a sacred lake in Tibet where search parties would normally go and they would look for a vision.
In the second half of this episode, Simon Beaton explores how the process works in picking who the next Dalai Lama will be and what we know already about the succession plan. That's coming up. First, though, let's get into the headlines with Katrina Blowers. It is Friday, July 12th.
Hey everyone, an Australian couple has been found dead at a luxury hotel in the Philippines. They were discovered bound and gagged inside their room in Tagaytay, southwest of Manila, along with a Filipino companion. Local police have confirmed they've launched a murder investigation, while the mayor of the town, Abraham Tolentino, has apologised to Australia.
We will try our very best to resolve this early. We're very sorry to our Australian friends.
So here's what we know. The murdered couple has been identified as 57-year-old David Fisk. His wife is Luchita Cortez, and she was 55. And a 30-year-old woman who was also killed alongside them is believed to be Cortez's daughter-in-law. A manhunt has been launched for the suspect. Hotel CCTV footage shows a man in a black hoodie and shorts leaving the couple's room with a rucksack.
The NATO summit in Washington is wrapping up today, our time, with Australia set to promise a record amount of funding for Ukraine. Defence Minister Richard Marles, along with other Asia-Pacific leaders, will meet with President Volodymyr Zelensky on the sidelines of the summit to offer a $250 million package. The new promise of military aid is the single largest package offered by Australia since Russia's invasion. Also on the agenda is China, with Marles and other non-member leaders keen to strengthen ties with NATO amid fears of Beijing aggression and its relationship with Moscow. Meantime, also at NATO, Joe Biden has met with the UK's new Prime Minister, with Sir Keir Starmer saying afterwards the US President was, quote, on good form. It follows now 2 weeks of uncertainty around Biden's future as the Democratic nominee, but Starmer says he was mentally agile during their chat and they went through a huge number of topics, quote, at pace. So endorsement from the UK's leader, Katrina.
Yeah, although there's going to be a very, very big test for Joe Biden today with a press conference happening this morning, our time at 7:30. Now, this is the first time he's faced journalist questions since that car crash of a debate. Normally, Joe Biden's aides try and keep him away from unscripted conversations with journalists. So, the pressure is going to be on big time, and a lot of analysis and scrutiny is going to be on how he handles that. Just talking to some people around how Joe Biden would step aside if the pressure gets too much. And it comes down to really his decision. He needs to make the decision himself, although there is an amendment that could be enacted. It's the 25th Amendment to remove a president, and it allows for such action by the vice president and a majority of his cabinet if the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. So I think the only way forward with this, Sasha, is to get some kind of health crisis on the cards or a diagnosis that we were previously unaware of. Really, that's the only way that this could happen.
Yeah, well, or Biden making the announcement that he's not going to run. However, I did think that after 2 weeks, the chatter wouldn't be as loud, but it has persisted every single day. There is a new story about someone coming out to say that they don't support him or that he should reconsider, or, we saw Nancy Pelosi, George Clooney yesterday. So having the Democrats actually push him out, we see in Australia that happens every other day. Well, it did for a period of time. I don't know if the Democrats would want to take that action ahead of an election. I feel like the American people might not be as forgiving of knifing leaders, but time will tell. Let's see how this press conference goes this morning.
One of Hollywood's most iconic horror actresses has passed away. Shelly Duvall played Wendy Torrance in the 1980 blockbuster The Shining.
Here's Johnny.
Oh, God. That makes me feel scared just listening to that. I couldn't handle any of those movies when I was a kid. Duvall died at her home in Texas, age 75, after complications from diabetes. She actually fell out of favour with Hollywood. Duvall claims the industry turned on her and she disappeared from screens for 2 decades. But then she made a comeback last year in the film The Forest Hills.
She is iconic. You can't deny. I mean, I only watched The Shining very recently. I'd say I think it was last year or the year before that my husband and I went, let's watch it, because it's so well known in pop culture that here's Johnny scene. Even if you haven't seen the movie, you know what Shelly Duvall looks like. So hoping she is at rest now. And it's time to get out your tissues, everyone. The latest report on CEO pay in Australia has found they're earning less money. But here's why we might only be crying crocodile tears about this one. They are still taking home more than 50 times the average worker. What cost of living crisis indeed. The Australian Council of Superannuation Investors has crunched the numbers of the paychecks of bosses at the 100 biggest businesses in the country, finding they averaged $5 million a year in 2023-24. That's a drop from $5.2 million in the previous financial year. But fat bonuses have become the norm, according to the research, with just 8 CEOs of the 100 missing out on a bonus. Now, maybe this is a win for equality, Katrina. Maybe tell me if I'm reaching here. But Macquarie's Shamara Wickramanayake was the top earning boss with over $30 million. Now, she's topped the list for 3 years straight, and she's the first woman to do so. So I guess that's good.
Look, I think we are reaching for that silver lining, though, given a lot of people are defaulting on mortgages and can't find rentals, and then here's these guys earning. Imagine what you do with $30 million a year. I just can't even. Oh, it'd be such a nice problem to have, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
The reason that Macquarie operates this way is because it uses a profit share arrangement that rewards executives when the company performs well. The CEO of Commercial and Industrial Property Group, Goodman, was the second highest paid CEO, getting $27 million last financial year. Qantas's former chief, Alan Joyce, was third. So here's the interesting thing by comparison. Average Aussie pay is $98,000 a year, but that's not really accurate because it factors in all pays, which includes the CEO pays as well. So that really skews those figures. The median is a much more accurate representation of $65,000 a year. So $65,000 a year versus $30 million. Yeah, doesn't sound so great.
Can't they just share it with the rest of us? You know, how hard would that be? Katrina, thank you. Have a fabulous weekend. Next up, it's our deep dive into the Dalai Lama and whether there's a succession plan in place when he passes away.
Hi, Simon Beaton here with the briefing. He's confident he'll have over another 20 years before his time comes, but as the Dalai Lama approaches his 90th birthday, there are many around the world wondering who his successor could be and what that could mean for the people of Tibet. The Dalai Lama is the spiritual leader of Tibet, but he has an incredibly important place in the leadership of what Tibetans say is their independent state. The tension here is Tibet is controlled by China, and his successor could make a significant impact in that relationship and the future of Tibet's independence. He's been exiled from his homeland since 1959 and instead lives at the foothills of the Himalayas in India, alongside over 100,000 others who are part of the Central Tibetan Administration, led by the Tibetan government in exile. Beijing wants to control who the next Dalai Lama will be, but obviously this would unlikely be in favour of Tibet's pursuit of independence, not to mention that, according to Tibetan Buddhism, the Dalai Lama is reincarnated rather than bestowed as a title. So how does that work, and what can we expect to happen next? Professor John Powers has published 20 books surrounding Tibetan Buddhism and is a fellow of the Australian Academy of Humanities and has himself personally had an audience with the Dalai Lama. John, thanks for joining us. Very quickly, how important is the Dalai Lama?
The Dalai Lama is unquestionably the leading religious figure among Tibetans. He's not the leading political figure, by the way. He renounced his political role about 20 years ago. So he really functions strictly as a religious leader and also as an important figure among Tibetans, and particularly Tibetan Buddhists.
What is he like in person?
Do you want to hear the story of how I first met him?
I would.
Well, I was studying Indian Buddhism for my master's degree in Canada. I was doing some backpacking in Northern Ontario with some friends. And one day, one of them announced that the Dalai Lama was going to be at a Buddhist church in Toronto in a couple of days, and he wanted to go and see him. And I really wasn't interested, but this guy had the car, so we all went. I walked into this church, and there was this presence that was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. It was not just the Dalai Lama, but also the 16th Gelwa Karmapa, who is another one of the three most important reincarnated lamas. And they just filled up the place with their presence. And there were probably about 50 children there. And nobody was fidgeting. They were like transfixed by these guys chanting in Tibetan. You know, all the adults were also like transfixed by this. It was mostly going on in Tibetan too. Long pauses for translations and stuff. So like this wasn't a choreographed performance by any means. But, you know, he really is, he's remarkable. My graduate advisor, who was his translator for about 20 years, told me that the thing that impressed him most about the Dalai Lama was that he's always on. He's always the Dalai Lama. He spent about 20 years traveling around the world when he was doing speaking tours. And he said, you know, he gets up at like 4 a.m, he does his early meditations, he has a full day and everything. And say 10 o'clock at night, the guy's worn out, you know, he's had this full day and he's never grumpy. He's never short-tempered. He is always himself all the time. And he's always on message. He said one day, as he was talking with them late at night after a long day, he thought, you know, if there really were, the Dalai Lama is believed to be the reincarnation of the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara. And so my advisor, who was quite a skeptic himself, said, you know, I'm not even sure there is such a thing as Avalokiteshvara, but if there were, and if he were to take human form, he'd probably be a lot like this guy.
Now, he did just celebrate his 89th birthday. I know that the Dalai Lama is a religious leader, but he is so important to Tibet. And right now the world is talking so much about Joe Biden's ability to govern at the age of 81. How is the Dalai Lama faring?
Well, the Dalai Lama doesn't govern, so that's one important difference. As I said, he renounced all of his political roles more than 20 years ago. And he's been very clear about that he doesn't want any political role, he doesn't want political power, and that he's strictly a religious figure. And so his role really is to, you know, give teachings, to serve as an example of the tradition for other Tibetan Buddhists. There's a parliament in exile that makes political decisions for Tibetan exiles. And of course, Tibetans have no political power inside Tibet. It's completely run by the Chinese Communist Party. And no Tibetan has ever had any position of real power within the political system there.
I'll move on to China and Tibet and those issues in a second. But first, I feel that many might recall last year he faced a big backlash for a video where he asked an 8-year-old boy for a kiss and then to suck his tongue. Not a usual request that you'd expect from a leader. Now, I know that there was quite an important cultural element that was lost in Western media, but does this still signify that the Dalai Lama is losing some sense of relevancy?
I don't think so. He's an old Tibetan man. He was born in Tibet. He grew up in Tibetan culture. His English is still not very good. He's had a lot of interactions, of course, with English-speaking people, but he remains very much a part of Tibetan culture. And I asked a number of Tibetans about that because it was something that seemed very strange to me too, you know, somebody who isn't a Tibetan. And pretty much every, particularly older Tibetan that I met, said, yes, this is a very common thing among older Tibetans. And one friend of mine told me that she has an older sister who does that same sort of thing with her kids, that it's a playful sort of thing. She'll give them some candies and then she'll say, I only have one left. It's the one in my mouth. Do you want to take it out of my mouth? And this is like, you know, it's considered playful. It's the sort of thing that older Tibetans do, but it's not like sexual as it was made out to be. It's not creepy or anything like that. It's just sort of, you know, like a thing that older Tibetans do.
Now, moving on to China, why are they so invested in who the next Dalai Lama will be?
Well, Tibet is very important for China as a symbol. When they invaded in the 1950s and took it over, they claimed that China had always been the rightful ruler of Tibet, but that has never actually been true. And so they had to try to establish legitimacy. And one of the ways they wanted to do this was by taking over the religion system. And in particular, they have tried to exercise control over the system of reincarnating lamas. And that's been a very important part of their agenda. And it's one that they really can't do because they don't have the authority to do it. And they're also blocked from doing it because of the fact that they are a materialist. They only believe in matter. And so they don't believe, for instance, that reincarnation is even possible. And so it makes it really bizarre that a group of communist, atheist materialists are claiming that they have sole authority to adjudicate reincarnation when they believe that reincarnation is a fiction.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about that then. So the Dalai Lama is chosen through reincarnation. How is a Dalai Lama usually picked?
Well, first of all, it's important to recognize what Dalai Lama means. Dalai Lama is one of several epithets that is used for this particular reincarnation series. So he is the 14th in a reincarnational series. When one Dalai Lama dies, there is a very rigorous search procedure that is run according to traditional methods. These involve things like divination and visions. There's a sacred lake in Tibet where search parties would normally go and they would look for a vision. In the case of this Dalai Lama, the search party saw an image in this lake of a house with a turquoise roof. They saw a young boy and a dog standing in the front yard, and they saw the Tibetan letters A, Ka, and Ma in the sky overhead. And this was later seen as indicating that he was going to be born in Amdo, in an area near Kumbum, the main monastery, and in a village that started with the letter Ma. And so when they sent search parties all throughout the Tibetan cultural area to search for the reincarnation, and there were a number of candidates who were identified as possible reincarnations. And then there are a series of tests that one of the most important ones involves showing the candidate articles that belong to the predecessor and then other versions of these articles like prayer beads and things like that. And it's assumed that the correct one will be able to choose the ones that he had in a previous life. And the present Dalai Lama did that successfully. According to the story of the search party that found him, they also said that when the search party showed up, they were actually in disguise. So the head Lama was disguised as a merchant, so they wouldn't sort of assume that he was a Lama and that they might be looking for a Dalai Lama. And that his assistant was actually disguised as the person in charge. This young boy walked up to him and he said, "Why do you have my prayer beads?" And that he was actually wearing the prayer beads of the 13th Dalai Lama. And the Lama asked, "You know who I am?" And he said, he addressed him by name.
Wow. Okay.
And so the idea is that all of us are being reborn over and over again, right? In an endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. And for most of us, this is just done according to our karma, and we have no control over it. But advanced practitioners, according to the system, develop the ability to be aware of the process and to consciously choose the places where they're going to be reborn. And so somebody like a Dalai Lama will be choosing a place, first of all, where he can continue the unfinished work of his predecessor, and at a place where he's going to have the freedom to do this. And so the present Dalai Lama, whose name is Tenzin Gyatso, has said on several occasions that he will not take rebirth in occupied Tibet because it would be impossible for him to continue his work under Chinese occupation and being controlled by the Chinese. He's hinted on several occasions that he might be reborn in Arunachal Pradesh in northern India, which is where the 6th Dalai Lama was born. And this would really anger the Chinese because they make a very assertive claim to legitimate overlordship of Arunachal Pradesh, even though they've never actually exercised this. So the Tibetan exiles have indicated that they will choose a Dalai Lama using the traditional sorts of processes.
You did say that the next Dalai Lama is likely to come from outside Tibet. Could they come from Australia?
Sure. And the Dalai Lama has said that. He said that it's really open. He's also said that it could be a woman, for instance. He's also said that if the Tibetan people don't think that the position of Dalai Lama is still relevant, that they could choose not to choose a Dalai Lama. So from his point of view, he's a Lama, right? So he's going to reincarnate. Whether he reincarnates as a recognized Dalai Lama or not, for him, it doesn't really matter, he says. So if the Tibetan people think that they still need a Dalai Lama, then that's fine. But he's actually said on a number of occasions that this position of Dalai Lama is a relic of a feudal theocratic system. And it may well not be relevant anymore. And unless the Tibetan people want to continue it, he really, isn't stressed one way or the other.
He has said that he will announce a succession plan. Do you know when we'll find that out?
Well, he's said publicly and privately, he told me this about 10 years ago, that he plans to live until he's 111 years old. When he first told me this, my response was, that's really going to piss off the Communist Party. And he laughed and said, yeah, it probably will. So he said he's consulted with Tibetan doctors as well as with oracles, and he's done the divinations and so forth. So he believes that that is the likely time that he has, that is until he's 111. So he said that there's no real rush to lay out a succession plan. But that said, it's still pretty clear what it's going to be, right? So one of the standard ideas is that the incumbent has sole authority to make predictions and to set the parameters of the rebirth. So the Dalai Lama said, I'm not going to be reborn in occupied Tibet, for instance. But they will follow the traditional procedures, and they will find someone who all the people will probably agree is, in fact, the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. And then, they'll come to a consensus on this. And then he will be officially enthroned and invested with that title.
John Powers, this is so interesting. Thank you for joining us on The Briefing.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
That was Professor John Powers. And thanks for listening to today's briefing. That's it for now. Before you go, though, we'd love it if you could share this ep with someone you think might enjoy it. And if you want to keep up with our other content, you can check us out on Instagram at The Briefing Podcast, and on TikTok and YouTube, search Listener Newsroom. That's LISTNR. I'm Simon Beaton. See you soon.
Listener.